iPhone platform, the Android platform, and the Facebook platform are the most important.
Yep.
But they aren't the only platforms. Do you pay attention to the others? Do you have games on platforms that I didn't just mention?
We made a decision last year to not launch a game last year on the Android platform. And
you weren't alone, apparently, in making that decision.
And we weren't alone, and the piece that was confusing about it is you could see the hardware units moving, but it was very hard to understand how an economic ecosystem was going to evolve so that, I mean, it costs money to make a game, so you need to be able to make some money to pay for that. And that was really unclear, and it was unclear where the power structure in Android was going to resolve with carriers, with Google, with manufacturers. And so we've been kind of really taking a wait-and-see attitude on Android until really very recently, where we've started to see some of the what seemed like massive fragmentation kind of starting to get more structured, where we see Google making efforts with in-app purchase and some of their continued efforts to try to make payment systems. And so with the clarity coming out and the volume of units, we are moving now, and we'll have a number of Android apps out by the end of this year. I think as we understand the Android ecosystem is one of the ones where it looks like advertising may be a bigger key to the revenue stream than, for example, on iPhone or some other places.
And are you suspecting that advertising is going to be a bigger part of the Android platform because that's how they're designing it, and this is consistent with their advertising business model?
On the Android, what we're seeing is people who are much more cost sensitive. So they're choosing lower cost handsets. We're seeing they're a much more technically savvy audience, so we see a lot higher piracy rates on the Android. And thus we think that the business model that has to succeed there is one that's not going to be dependent on people spending $2.99 up front, because all that does is drive piracy.
Yep.
And so we think thus on Android you really have to have sort of that freemium virtual goods or advertising to effectively monetize.
How concerned is Google, from your perspective, about this piracy issue on the Android platform, and how does that compare with piracy in the Apple App Store environment?
On the Android platform, I think you've got a couple of factors going on. I'd say the way the Android is initially marketed, like with all those Droid ads, right? It's very targeted towards a young, tech-savvy, arguably perhaps a hacker kind of environment. And so what I don't know specifically what Google is doing about that, other than the only way we as developers can really manage that is that apps are really going after this free-to-play, ad-supported kind of model where you have a way to generate some revenues on it without having to rely on the consumer opening up and putting their credit card in up front, which is what drives the piracy issues, is people always want to get around that purchase. On the Apple side, I think part of the reason we don't see it as big of an issue there is it's attracted just a different customer. We do see piracy rates differentiated on the iPhone, for our games anyway, by region globally. So we see some higher piracy rates. For example, in China, where Apple is making huge progress, but there are also some knockoff iPhone devices, and so we tend to see a higher piracy rate in China, which we assume is driven by people buying iPhone clones.